You would have heard about generational wealth, but do you know about generational trauma? Like generational wealth, it is being passed down from generation after generation after generation after generation. Like your parents pass down some trauma to you, and you, if you don't, let go or deal with it, and eventually release the chains that is actually holding you to this trauma, you will also eventually pass down this trauma to your children, and they will pass on to their children and their children and their children. It's like the most consistent and the most persistent dominant trait in your whole family heritage and your family tree is trauma, generational trauma. Now, the reason why I say this is because many of us, we have gone through certain upbringing, we have faced certain situations, and throughout our entire adult life, we are here coping with that trauma. We're doing all these external things just to cope with the trauma that we have endured. Like, we're not really free from it, and every decision we make, it's kind of driven by that trauma. We're not really let go, and that's why people say, I act like my father when I'm here. I act like my mother. Only in their 40s, they realize like all their characteristics, their attitude kind of matches their parents, especially not in a good way. It's especially these negative traits that kind of match the parents. Now, the reason it happens is because your parents didn't really know everything while they were raising you. That's why you see your parents are not that great with you, but they're very friendly, they're very caring to your grandchildren. You always notice it's a very common pattern and a common trait across several, ethnicities, backgrounds, and even countries, where everyone's grandparents are very kind, very, caring, non-judgmental, and they have this amazing quality of patience and taking care of the grandchild without implying too many restrictions or too severe punishments. The reason because is these grandparents were once parents. Like, if you ask the children of the grandparents, like the immediate children, like their children or your parents, they will tell that your grandparents were an absolute, monster. They used to have so much restrictions. They used to literally impose severe punishments. They used to be so strict. But when you were born, your grandparents had immense kindness. It is, in a way, it's a redemption arc for parents to, live up to their, actual expectations of how to raise a child, because they didn't really know when they had children themselves. They learned from their mistakes. They had their own set of traumas to deal with, which they have not let go of. They were being run by the trauma, and there were so many external situations that were being presented from the external medium, their friends, their family, their relatives, the media, their workspace, their neighborhood, kind of influenced other external triggers, which eventually added up to the trauma. And when they had children, this really compounded, and this became a huge snowball, a huge nuclear bomb. And many of them, went through these coping mechanisms such as alcohol, cigarettes, drugs. But these coping mechanisms will just put you in a state where you don't really, remember or think about all your problems. It's not really solving the trauma. It is just displacing you from the thought process or making your mind clear for that period of time. It is not a permanent fix. And they go get drunk, get high, go party, do some drugs, come back home, and now the trauma is still prevalent. They have not really let go of the trauma while they were partying and doing drugs, and now they come back home and the trauma creeps back up, and it is released in a form of inflicting certain trauma on their children. It comes in the form of words, actions, punishments, belief systems that are being enforced upon their children, because They see that as a medium. And at this point, many parents, they don't even realize that they're inflicting trauma upon their children. They're influencing their child's belief systems, but they do it in a very unconscious way. They think they're doing the best they can, and yes, they're doing the best they can at that possible time. You can't really blame your parents for inflicting the trauma upon you. And this is the whole thing about generational trauma. Your parents have got trauma from their parents. Their parents have got trauma from their parents. And their parents have got trauma from their parents. And everyone in this whole family line is blaming their parents, is blaming their upbringing, is blaming their society. And only when you stop blaming external things or your upbringing and take complete responsibility for your trauma and your thought processes and your patterns of thinking, and even embodying, living your emotions at a daily, consistent, given basis, only then you can let go of the trauma and actually live a much more fulfilling and more freeing life without being chained to something external. And that's what brings me to the point that when you are overcoming your trauma, the best way, the most efficient way is to actually take full responsibility, not to blame anybody. Take full responsibility and kind of detach yourself. You don't really have to be defined by your trauma, by your upbringing, by the social conditioning that has taken place growing up. And when you become an adult, in your 20s, you are being run by your childhood trauma. Every decision you make is kind of being run by your childhood trauma. If you don't really let go, this manifests into relationships. The relationships that you have will have certain toxic behavior, certain things that you don't really desire, but deep down inside, this is familiar. Like, this is the reason many people get into toxic relationships. And when they come out of toxic relationships, they get a stable relationship and they don't really fit in. Eventually, they leave that relationship or turn that relationship into another toxic relationship. That is because toxic environment was very familiar for them. This calm, peaceful environment is not really familiar. And when things are not familiar, there is this sense of abandonment. There's this sense of being alone, lost in the unknown, lost in the abyss. And that is why they kind of turn things back into how it was, like their definition of normal. In childhood, if you had this belief system that you are not really that confident, you're not really socially out there, you must not really say certain things. If you have been brought up in that belief system throughout your entire adult life, you will be acting, living, and thinking in that paradigm. You'll be very afraid to even say things out. You won't really be social. It'll affect your social life, your relationships, and eventually your children's life too, because you will pass this on to your children. And you'll start embodying this belief system. Like, if you have been brought up by very narcissistic parents who told you to shut your mouth every time you try to talk, or who told you that you talk too much, or certain things like about your social behavior. This is an example here which I'm giving here, and you will tend to give or get social anxiety. You will start behaving in a weird way in social situations. You will think it is not okay to say these things, it is not okay to say those things. But up to a certain extent, this control is good. But when it consumes you, you will start overthinking too much. You will have that fear to actually express your opinions, your likes, your dislikes, your thoughts. Like, literally, you'll be in a relationship with somebody and you will fail to express your true self because you're so attached to that belief system of that trauma that you have gone through. And now this brings me on to another point, and that is when you eventually get a child of your own, that's when life gets real. And now you have so much pressure. You have this trauma that's been holding you, running you for such a long period of time. And then you have your relationship with your partner and the relationship that you have with your friends, your workplace, your neighborhood. It's kind of compounding, all right? It's kind of compounding. It's kind of making it more real. And then you have responsibility to take care of your own child and you have your relatives, you have your cousins, you have your nephews, you have your aunts, uncles, and then everything kind of comes in all at the same time, and you have so much stress. And this is where you don't really know what to do. Like, you will try these external coping mechanisms such as cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, but it won't really help you in the long term. It will make you forget about the pain for a short period of time, but eventually it's going to creep up in. Eventually, you will slip back into the traumatic state and start exhibiting behaviors which is run by your childhood trauma and by all these external triggers. And so many things are happening at the same time. And then what happens is you end up transferring the trauma to your children. And then your children will have something to complain about. They go through their early life kind of trying to revolt against you, trying to go against you, trying to get out of their trauma. And they will go slip into coping mechanisms. Like, if they don't really know how to deal with the trauma, they don't really know how to escape from it. They go through coping mechanisms, and eventually they will end up in your state where life gets real. They have children of their own, and now they will start transferring that trauma that they have gone through to their children. This is the law of state transference. And now you have the power to break this chain. You don't really have to carry on any trauma to your children. And grandparents understand this. Only when their grandchildren are born, they have this higher wisdom that kind of kicks in, and they realize time on this planet is limited, and just allow the child to be whoever it wants to be. That's very simple. You can't really force another person to do something. And this is the idea, like, even in relationships, if you're trying to force your partner to listen to you, do everything as you say. I mean, everybody has a desire inside. They don't really want to accept it. They're trying to change the partner. They're trying to change their belief systems to fit into their own belief systems, but you can't really change. Even if you do change your partner and make your partner nod to every little thing that you say, like every thing that you mention, your partner just obeys. In the short term, you will have this gratification, but in the long term, you will lose attraction, and you will lose that relationship. You will feel like your partner lacks originality. Your partner lacks authenticity. And the same thing happens when parents grow old. They kind of realize, like, if their children, son, daughter, accepted and obeyed every little word, everything that they said, every decision, like major decision in life, if the children obeyed all the decisions that the parents have made, only when they get older, the parents realize, like, it was a mistake. They look at their children and they're like, you lack originality. You lack authenticity. You just did whatever I told you to do. These were my goals manifested through you. And that is when they kind of realize this. Now, they won't really tell you this. If you go ask your parent, they will not open their mouth about this. But deep down inside, this is what they feel. They will tell it in different ways, but it eventually leads down to the same feeling. It's like, I'm not sad. No, I'm not sad. I'm over that breakup. Like, if you can get to know just by the expression and the way a person is telling that I'm not sad, that the person is very sad. So the same thing applies here. Like, the parents will tell you that you following everything that they said makes them proud and happy, but deep down it doesn't, because you lacked originality, you lacked authenticity. And that is why we kind of love drama. You see, human beings, we love watching movies. We love going and seeing extreme sports. We love video games. People have fun by watching movies, television, going on vacations, partying, smoking, drinking, drugs, all this stuff, because none of this is fitting into that social upbringing. that you have gone through. None of this is fitting into the rules of the society. Everything is here to make you break free. You are using all these things to break free from the society because you feel trapped into this belief system. You feel trapped in here. And when you are nodding your head to your parents' belief systems, when you are absorbing their trauma, nodding their head and doing everything that you say, everything that they say, eventually, in the short term, they will find instant gratification, but in the long term, they will feel so much regret. Like, what the hell did I do to my children's life? Because they've been using their wishes, whatever they wanted is being manifested out of you. And whatever you want is not happening. And some parents are very toxic. They will use this as an opportunity to get what they want, and they don't really care about you. And you will understand this once you have a kid, once you have past a certain age, and then you will start resenting your parents. And this resentment, if it's not resolved, will pass on or will be passed on to your children. So that is why it is very key, or it is very important to let go of your trauma, overcome your trauma. It will not only save you from, going in and finding external validation and hits from these external substances such as drugs, alcohol. It will not only improve your social life, change your belief systems, and help you manifest, but also it will prevent your children from taking on that generational trauma. It will prevent your children from resenting you because you didn't know how to deal with your trauma and you're passing it on to them. Eventually, it'll break that generational curse. Now, I'm not saying that it will stop generational trauma in and altogether. All I'm saying is, because everybody goes through trauma, everybody goes through some trauma or another. If you stop the generational trauma, it becomes easier for your children to deal with the trauma life throws at them. Like, if you have overcome your upbringing, the trauma that you went through as a child, everything in life becomes more easier. These external triggers, your friends saying something, these social interactions, your neighborhood people, the people in your neighborhood telling something, your workspace, your mentor, your boss, your friends, your relationships, all this are, just minor petty issues, all right? The major trauma in your life is your childhood trauma, the things that you have gone through as a kid, as a teenager, and in the earlier parts of your life. If you let go of that, everything else becomes way, way, way easier to handle, to deal with, and eventually you will start being more free and stop this generational trauma altogether. I mean, this other forms of trauma, it's fine. You can deal with that. You don't really need insane dosages of alcohol or drugs to cope with them. You don't really need some extreme form of release to cope with that trauma. You go through extreme form of release just because you love it, not because you're trying to run from some trauma, not because you're trying to escape from some pain. And whatever you do in life, it is kind of a reflection of your trauma. But eventually, when you let go of your trauma, your decisions change. It's like the life you had while growing up is completely different from the life you are living right now. And that happens only when you overcome or let go of the trauma. And many people are finding themselves stuck in life because they have the same belief systems. They believe that they are not social enough. They believe that money is bad. They believe money is taboo. And this creates mental blockages in your mind that doesn't allow you to make money, make big money, or eventually be very social. And sometimes even in some cultures and upbringing, love, showing love is considered as taboo. There's so much resistance while showing love. They'll be growing up in a family and they'll see their parents, and their expression of love is very plateau, is very down, and this kind of seeps into the mind of the kid, because as a kid you are doing something called as immersive learning. You're learning from your surroundings. There's no book, there's no script that you're following. You're just absorbing things like a sponge. And when you see your environment, this influences you more than you can ever imagine. And even it really happened to me when I got into my first relationship. I was so uptight. I was thinking about all these weird rules, culture, and stuff, but I realized that these were the result of my upbringing, the result of me being born at a certain place, at a certain city, around a certain society with a certain family. Their belief systems has been, you know, implied upon me, and I was just following that belief system. I was so uptight, overthinking in my head, thinking about every little thing I'm going to say. I was always thinking about how to show love. I was thinking when it comes to love, when you are in love, you don't really think. When you are making love, you don't really think. It happens naturally. When you're having fun, you don't really think. It happens naturally. And I was there, with my first girlfriend. I'm just sitting there. I'm thinking what to say, what I shouldn't say. And I was so nervous. And I realized like this is my core belief systems, which are just coming to the surface. And I tried doing this external fix, like learning conversation hacks, learning these strategies, dating hacks, but none of them really work in the long term. In the short term, you may get some validation, a boost or something, but in the long term, it doesn't really do anything. The only transformation happens only when you let go of your trauma and start living in the present moment. When that happened, I became more natural. I stopped getting into my head. I stopped overthinking. It was completely, my whole belief system was shattered, and I made this new belief system. It is what you feed your mind. Your parents, your upbringing, society, they kind of fed your mind some things. And you're acting, thinking, and living according to that belief system. But now you have the power to let go of it, create a new belief system, and you start acting, living, feeling, and embodying that person or the new belief system on your daily waking life. And this is how you manifest things in life. And this is how you even think like your life around, turn everything in your life around. And it'll seem like a wonder, because your childhood was completely different. In your adult life, you're completely different. And then when you go back to your family, they don't really recognize you anymore, because you have this completely new belief system. And they're like, okay, what the hell has happened? So let go of your trauma. Let go of that generational trauma and watch everything else just become easier.